Hebrews 12 verse 1. Running light, the witnesses, the weights, and the race. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Hebrews 12 verse 1 is where the long history of faith becomes a direct summons to the church. Chapter 11 was not written merely to stir admiration for the saints of old, but, as John Brown indicates, as the practical improvement of that whole sacred record. The Spirit has shown us Abel, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and the suffering people of God, not so that we might stand at a distance and praise them, but so that we might hear the force of that opening word. Therefore, that wherefore gathers the whole roll call of faith and presses it upon the conscience of the present church as motive for endurance. The original hearers were under pressure, tempted to sluggishness and drift, and this verse comes to them with holy urgency. Yet the urgency is not bare exhortation. It rises out of the whole argument of Hebrews. The saints of old belonged to the same covenant of grace, though they lived amid shadows and figures, while new covenant believers possessed the substance and reality to which those things pointed. They trusted promise. We live in the days of fulfillment. They saw from afar. We stand where the better things have come. So this call to run is not a summons to self-manufactured resolve. It is a call to grace-sustained perseverance in the light of God's covenant faithfulness. This is the burden of the verse. Hebrews 12 verse 1 teaches that saving faith is an active, corporate tenacity by which believers are strengthened by the witness of the redeemed, stripped of every worldly encumbrance, and upheld by grace to run with endurance the race set before them. First, consider the strengthening witness of the redeemed. The verse begins, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. The word, nephos, speaks of a vast, dense, encircling multitude. This is not a thin line of examples, but a great cloud. Yet these witnesses are not chiefly spectators, as though the point were that heaven is observing our performance. Pink, Davidson, and Calvin all help here. They are witnesses because their lives bear witness. Their histories testify to the truth of God's promises. Their perseverance is evidence that faith is no illusion and that the unseen is more substantial than the visible. Their good report is not ornamental biography, it is testimony. That is why this cloud brings strong consolation. The church is often tempted to think its trials are unique, its fatigue unprecedented, its calling unusually severe. Hebrews answers that temptation by surrounding the believer with the testimony of the ages. Abel trusted God in a dark world. Noah trusted him against the whole current of sight. Abraham trusted him while dwelling as a stranger. Moses trusted him when the treasures of Egypt were before his eyes. Others trusted him in chains, in deserts, in want, and under the shadow of death. Their witness says to the church, God has not failed those who sought him. He has not mocked the faith he himself wrought in them. He has proved himself a rewarder. And this witness is covenantal. These saints are not relics of another religion. They are part of the one household of faith. They had the shadows. We have the clearer substance. They walked by promise. We run in the days when promise has flowered toward fulfillment. That does not diminish them. It magnifies our privilege. If they endured by a smaller light, how much more should we, to whom greater clarity has been given, run with holy steadiness? So the cloud is not meant to embarrass the weary believer, but to strengthen him. It tells him that the race is severe, but not strange, long, but not forsaken, costly, but not empty. Second, consider the renunciation required of the runner. The writer moves from witness to command. Let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. The imagery is athletic. The Christian life is in agon, a contest, and no man runs freely while wrapped in what burdens him. The participle apotheimenoi means putting off, stripping away, casting aside. The call is decisive. First, there is every weight. The word onkos refers to what is superfluous, burdensome, encumbering. Pink and Moffat press the matter with searching force. A weight is not necessarily something openly sinful. It may be an earthly possession, a familiar comfort, an anxiety, an ambition, a routine, even a religious form. Anything that glues the heart to this world and makes the soul heavy in the things of God. That reaches deeper than the renunciation of scandalous evil. It reaches into the respectable life. It asks what has grown spiritually cumbersome. It asks what loads the affections with earth and leaves them less free for heaven. Some things are not forbidden, yet they are unfitting for a runner. Some things are lawful, yet they hinder spiritual vigor and weaken holy readiness. Then the writer speaks of the sin that clings so closely. The rare word, euperistatos, suggests something that surrounds and entangles from every side. Pink identifies this especially as the love of self and connected with the pressure toward apostasy and the hardening of the heart. That is weighty and searching. The besetting sin is not merely one isolated vice. It is the inward self-love and unbelief that resists costly perseverance. It is the soul bending back toward itself, preferring safety to faithfulness, ease to endurance, and visible comfort to steadfast obedience. Sin entangles because it is deceitful. It does not always come as open revolt. Often it works quietly, wrapping itself around the desires until what was once tolerated as small begins to hold the heart fast. This is why the renunciation of the runner must be grave and honest. But even here the text must not be heard as mere moral technique. Hebrews is not teaching that the believer earns perseverance by decluttering his life. Rather, the God who calls his people to run also works in them what is pleasing in his sight. Grace does not eliminate the need to cast aside weights. Grace makes such holy severities possible. The Christian lays aside what hinders not to create life, but because divine life is at work within him. He renounces weights and entangling sin because God is loosening his grasp on what is passing and training his heart for what endures. Third, consider the endurance required for the race set before us. The writer now reaches the heart of the exhortation. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. The Christian life is not a dash of easy emotion, but a long conflict requiring hupomonei, endurance. Barclay's description is apt. It is an unromantic virtue. Brown speaks of it as the steady, active, persevering discharge of Christian duty. That is precisely what many believers need to hear. Endurance is not only for the dramatic hour of persecution. It is for the weary day, the ordinary burden, the long delay, the repeated obedience, the duty that must be done again, and the trial that has not yet lifted. It is the grace to walk and not faint. And this race is set before us. It is appointed. It lies before us by divine ordering. We do not choose our lane, our afflictions, or the peculiar shape of our course. Providence marks it out. That means the believer dare not despise his path as though divine wisdom had mismeasured it, nor envy in others as though God had dealt out a better portion elsewhere. The race may be painful, but it is not accidental. The course has been set before us by the same God who promises the recompense of reward. Here the balance of Hebrews must be kept clear. Perseverance is both a divine gift and a human duty. The church is called to run, to labor, to continue, to refuse drawing back unto perdition. But all such continuance is sustained by the God who works in his people what is well-pleasing in his sight. The exhortation is real, but the strength is not self-originated. The runner is not thrown back upon native stamina. He is upheld by covenant mercy. He runs because God is faithful. He continues because grace is operative. He perseveres because the Lord who set the course before him does not abandon the work of his own hands. Reflections for today. Hebrews 12 verse 1 speaks with peculiar force because many believers are weary in quiet ways. They are not all facing prison walls or public hostility, but they know the pressure of ordinary strain, long anxieties, repeated disappointments, thinning spiritual appetite, and the subtle tyranny of a world that trains the heart to live by sight. In such seasons, the danger often begins not with gross rebellion, but with weight. Too much attachment to what is passing. Too much dependence upon what can be seen. Too much of the soul fastened to things that cannot go with us into eternity. It is possible to lean on status, routines, possessions, visible success, or emotional steadiness as though these were substance. But they are movables. They are not fit foundations for the soul. And when the heart begins to seek assurance in them, It grows heavy for heaven. The believer must therefore learn to measure earthly things soberly. Some must be received with thanksgiving and held loosely. Some must be reordered. Some must be cast aside. But none must be allowed to master the heart. The text also presses where modern believers are often most vulnerable: self-love disguised as prudence, caution, self-protection, or weariness. The besetting sin is not always loud. Often it is the heart quietly arranging life so that costly obedience can be avoided. That is why this verse is not merely calling us to be more disciplined. It is calling us to a grace-enabled severance from whatever hinders communion with God and steady continuance in the path He has appointed. And yet the verse is not a word of despair. The cloud of witnesses stands around the church like a great testimony that God does not forsake His own. The race set before you is not meaningless. The office corridor, the traffic jam, the quiet burden at home, the private sorrow, the long obedience in a hidden place, these are not outside the race. They are part of it. And if they are part of the race set before you, then they also lie beneath the wise and fatherly government of God. That is where courage returns, not in denying the hardship, but in knowing that the God who appoints the course also grants grace to finish it. Conclusion. Hebrews 12 verse 1 gathers the witness of the ages and presses it upon the conscience of the church. The cloud of witnesses strengthens us by testifying that God is faithful. The call to lay aside every weight and entangling sin exposes whatever would make the soul heavy and the feet slow. And the command to run with endurance reminds us that the Christian life is a set race, ordered by providence and sustained by grace. The triumph of this verse is that it turns the believer away from the clutter of earth and back toward the reality of the unseen. It teaches him that faith is not a passing surge of zeal, but a holy continuance under divine promise. So hear the word as it is meant to be heard. Let the witnesses strengthen you. Let the weights be cast aside. Let the besetting sin be named and forsaken. And run with endurance the race set before you, until the God who has called His people through all ages brings you, with them, safely home. Amen.